A brutalist skyscraper, just one in the sea of buildings that's New York City's skyline, but its facade deceives. Within, objects and phenomena break the laws of physics, bend reality to their power, and threaten to destroy human existence. This building and its secrets are under the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Control. But when Jesse Faden arrives searching for answers on the disappearance of her brother Dylan, she realizes just how weak the Bureau's grasp holds. She's thrust into the center of a clandestine world whose agents and factions make her question her own perceptions of the universe. Jesse must use cunning and budding paranatural powers to combat a mysterious hostile force that has invaded the Bureau. If it escapes, it could corrupt the entire world. Amidst the dangers, Jesse untangles a narrative that brings both her and her brother closer to this existential threat than she could have possibly imagined. This is the complete story of Control. Jesse Faden, after having spent most of her life looking for her brother Dylan and the government agency responsible for his disappearance nearly 20 years ago, finally reaches the Federal Bureau of Control. She's long suspected there's more to the secretive bureau and the greater world than superficial appearance, but is unprepared for what lurks beneath. Jesse walks through abandoned front offices and a strange janitor to find a dead man lying next to a peculiar weapon, and then horror as most inside the bureau seem possessed by an otherworldly force. They float unnaturally in the air while the hallways fill with their ceaseless droning of a strange incantation. Jesse quickly learns the dead man is Zachariah Trench, the director of the FBC. The agents are victims of an assault by an alien force known as the Hiss that has corrupted most of the bureau and attempts to invade Jesse's own mind. But Faden is protected by another force, a presence in her mind she refers to as Polaris, her guiding star. Jesse and Polaris trudge through the oldest house to rescue Dylan, free as much of the bureau as they can, and put an end to the Hiss invasion before it spreads. But Jesse's journey is only a slice of a greater story and unfolds during the climax of events that have been building for many decades. To better understand her situation, we must first appreciate the history of the bureau and the actions taken by its members that has led us here. Have you ever witnessed something you couldn't explain? Have you ever felt something greater than coincidence, or experienced a force beyond our knowledge? There is a space, a world of gray between impossible and expected, where bizarre events unfold. Control inhabits this world, separate from our own. It's a world of unknown, of unidentified, of undiscovered. In this world, there exist things indescribable, paranatural forces, altered forms of reality, otherworldly intelligences, other dimensions and separate planes of existence. It's a world where the unexplained and the occult are quite real, but hidden where most people don't care or don't dare to look. Control is inspired by the fictional SCP Foundation, whose motto, Secure, Contain, Protect, guides the organization as it discovers and researches the paranormal, supernatural, or extraterrestrial. The SCP analog is the Federal Bureau of Control, or FBC, whose agents and locations form the backbone of what Jesse Faden interacts with throughout her story. Sometime in the early 20th century, a group of individuals fascinated with supernatural events formed an organization to investigate such phenomena. Founded in mystic and esoteric beliefs, this nascent organization became the predecessor to the Federal Bureau of Control. Not much is known of the early FBC, nor of its directors until the 11th, Theodore Ashe Sr. His likeness, and perhaps those of his predecessors, hang on a wall in the central office. Ashe Sr.'s directorship saw the Bureau officially recognized as a federal agency of the U.S. government in 1964. This is merely a public front, as the FBC has operated independently beyond oversight since its secretive inception. The Bureau's purpose is to investigate paranatural phenomena, a blanket definition to cover any object, event, location, or element that violates established laws of reality and circumvents current scientific understanding. This we hear in the FBC's motto, Invenio Investigatio Imperium, find, research, control, and in the succinct words of one of its directors, Zachariah Trench, our mission is to expand the limits of human understanding and contain those elements we cannot yet control. The FBC is clandestine and works meticulously to keep its investigations invisible to the public eye. Such knowledge would invite hysteria, accusations, or worse. Originally headquartered in Washington, D.C., the FBC moved to New York after its agents investigated an altered world event, an event in which paranatural forces intrude on our universe, in the heart of the city that forever changed the Bureau. The altered world event opened a hole in reality that gave investigators access to a location later named the Oldest House. The Oldest House is a place of power, a realm governed by its own internal logic that defies rational explanation. It's invisible to outsiders and occupies a building in the city's downtown that actively distracts from undue attention. Inside, however, is not a conventional building, but a space that subverts reality. It's an ever-shifting labyrinth of infinite corridors, levels, and rooms that are themselves connected to alternate dimensions or planes of existence. Such an incredible discovery would have delighted Director Ash, but he passed shortly prior.
Father searched his entire life for something like this, and we find it 1 week after he's buried.
Ash Sr. named Broderick Northmore, a federal bureaucrat whom Zachariah Trench describes as a man all about power. A man like an explosion, hungry for authority, for order, for more. As his successor, and the new director of the FBC, spearheaded the first expeditions into the Oldest House. Northmore, Theodore Ash Jr., a brilliant scientist who led FBC's research, and many other agents explored the Oldest House and uncovered a region they called the Foundation. This, Ash Jr. hypothesized to be the heart or symbolic center of the Oldest House, as it sat atop powerful ley lines.
Aristotelian energy channels converging at its base. Ley lines, dragon roads, Hylogalinian, call them what you want. But this pillar is the crossroads.
Aptly named, as the Foundation appears to provide structural support to the Oldest House and its many dimensional branches. Here, the expedition found a large, onyx monolith, a stake in the Foundation that radiated an aura described by all as alluring. It was something extraterrestrial, wrought by intelligent hands, a paranatural structure called the Nail. An object rested near the nail's base, a firearm of sorts, but something beyond a mere weapon. Northmore reached for it, and when he grasped the object, later called the service weapon, he was instantly transported to another existence, the astral plane. The astral plane is a boundless white void not well understood by the FBC, and labeled as a mindscape, a location reached through astral projection of the human mind and partially acted upon by humanity's collective unconscious. It's a first indication of how the human mind and the species' shared experiences can influence paranatural phenomena, how belief begets power, and how unconscious archetypes of the imagination attract paranatural forces. The astral plane is a bewildering realm, and though its white runs without horizon, it isn't empty. An intelligent paranatural entity, or group of entities that calls itself the Board, inhabits the astral plane. A massive black inverted pyramid is ever present to those in the astral plane, and it's through this pyramid that the Board communicates with humans. They remain distant, invisible. Not even the directors have made physical contact with the Board. Though they control the Black Pyramid and exert great influence, it's hypothesized they don't command the entirety of the astral plane. The nail is fashioned from the same material as the pyramid and other objects of the astral plane. It acts as a strong tether that binds that realm to the physical world and allows the Board's influence to permeate the Oldest House. This line of reasoning suggests the Oldest House might be separate from the Board, their presence an outside force not entirely welcome, but more on that later. The Board is an enigma bound in mysteries. They presented the service weapon to the FBC and determined Northmore to be of sufficient character to wield it. The service weapon is an object of power, an item suffused with paranatural strength, but distinct from other such paranaturally altered items in that it's bound directly to the astral plane and the Board. The Board uses the service weapon as a litmus test to determine an individual's worthiness. Those who are chosen bind themselves to the weapon, draw on significant para-utilitarian power, abilities that defy human capacity, and are elevated to the position of director of the FBC. Those who fail, die. In research documents, it's reported that the service weapon has appeared in humanity's mythological past, as a sword from Arthurian legend, as an axe or hammer from Norse myth, and it's always carried by larger-than-life characters. This would suggest a long history between the board and mankind, much of it influenced by their designs. So it's through the service weapon that the board chooses and empowers its paragon, its director, who then acts as an intermediary between them and the FBC, a voice to make their will heard. Even though Broadmoor was chosen as director through human means, he also became the first director chosen by the board, and he returned from his astral dive with a greatly inflated ego. As Ash Jr. mentioned in this document, Broderick ranted about the board, how the directorship was meaningless before him, and how obsession to amass power and shape the FBC to the board's designs overcame him. A rift between the two men, who already despised one another, continued to expand as they plumbed the oldest house. Second to the service weapon is the hotline object of power, a telephone restricted exclusively to the director, which allows them a straight line of communication to the board, and potentially other extra-dimensional entities. Like the service weapon, anyone besides the director who picks up the hotline suffers terribly, as referenced in this document, where decades later, a communications intern unwittingly picked up the ringing phone and was irreparably traumatized.
She never recovered, and the handful of witnesses required extensive memory repression therapy.
The board appears benevolent, imparting vital information on paranatural forces, guiding research and breakthroughs. But their rule over the director, and by extension the entire bureau, hides ulterior and potentially dangerous motives. Following the discovery of the Foundation, the board, and the astral plane, the FBC entered a golden age of experimentation and investigation. Ash Jr. unlocked the power held within ley lines and established zones, known as control points, scattered throughout the oldest house, that stabilized regions of the ever-shifting landscape, which they dedicated to offices and research facilities. As more regions of the oldest house were rendered safe, the FBC completely moved from DC to New York by 1968. Ash's research also created the power cores that used limitless paranatural energy stored within the oldest house to fuel the FBC's needs. Deep in the Foundation, Ash and others also happened upon non-hostile entities, surprisingly human in appearance, that populated caverns within the Foundation. Ash referred to them as the id, and they are later called astral copies by Emily Pope, and described them as analogous to golems fashioned from clay, but devoid of the breath of life or will which other beings possess. Ash Jr.'s research reported that they were attached to the nail and therefore the astral plane, and that they unthinkingly carried out the will of their creator. The id were as curious about the humans of the FBC as Ash Jr. was of them. They showed him many things, including the strange drawings within the Foundation from unidentifiable times and unknown places that seemed to depict the visions of the board and Black Pyramid Northmoor had raved about. But Ash's focus on the nail and id disgruntled the board. His revelations on their nature could undermine their authority over the director and the FBC. They formed a two-pronged assault to terminate unwanted prying. First, they commanded an increasingly acquiescent Northmoor to leave the Foundation. Director Broderick ordered the FBC to move to higher levels before sealing off the Foundation and redacting its mention from files. To speed up the migration, the board turned the id hostile. Charged only with their creator's desire, the id attacked many FBC researchers, much to Ash Jr.'s surprise. The head of research disregarded Northmoor's order, however, and for a time brooded in the Foundation. Here, his thoughts hardened. Ash believed the board was a parasite in the oldest house that had now infected Northmoor and the FBC, using them for its own malevolent ends. Ash underwent strange bodily changes during his time in the Foundation. He became attuned to the oldest house and its ley lines. He also discovered the lesser nail, an object similar to the main nail but of a smaller scale, hidden amongst the caverns. The lesser nail was a conduit that connected him to another being of the astral plane, something he referred to as F, and their discourse seemed only to convince him of the board's evil ways. Ash Jr. eventually determined the only way to resist was from the inside, so returned to the upper levels and assumed his role as head of research, all the while trying to understand and oppose the board.
I doubt I can steer the Bureau back on the right course, but I have to try.
Under Director Northmore, the Bureau quickly took its present form. Agents were tasked with detecting and responding to AWEs, or altered world events. AWEs manifest predominantly as unknown energies or resonances, frequencies, wavelengths, vibrations that are characteristic of and hypothesized to be the key to paranatural phenomena. Again, the paranatural forces unleashed by AWEs are influenced by the human mind. Their forms often gravitate towards dominant constructs within the cultural zeitgeist, which results in the creation of altered items. Altered items are, for lack of a better word, possessed by paranatural energies, normal objects that now exude dangerous, unpredictable natures. How altered items are created and with what power they manifest isn't well understood, but closely linked to collective unconscious. The only difference between altered items and objects of power is that objects of power are tied to the board and astral plane, and they can be bound to a para-utilitarian, an individual sensitive to paranatural power. The explosion of AWEs and altered items led to the formation of various sectors and subdivisions within the Bureau, tasked to aspects of the containment and research process. The investigation sector was responsible for detecting and responding to AWEs worldwide. After covering up the truth to the public, they would bring back any altered items for study. The containment sector held all the Bureau's altered items and objects of power. Meanwhile, scientists in the research sector conducted experiments not only on AWEs and altered items, but also on the astral plane, other dimensions of existence, and the power of the human mind. Areas dedicated to hypnosis, astral projection, synchronicity, and probability were established to test hypotheses or make breakthroughs in understanding. Beyond the oldest house, there exist other places of power, locations that exhibit their own internal rules unconstrained by our reality. These regions, suffused with paranatural energy, are results of AWEs, are unpredictable, and can be deadly. A significant place of power for the FBC is the Ocean View Motel, which connects various regions of the oldest house, but also has doors that may open to other dimensions and planes. Discovered by the Bureau in the 1990s, some claim that the motel might be a physical location, but many others believe it to be a projection shaped by the human unconscious, as we hear Jesse Faden remark.
This feels like all of them, like something recognized from a dream.
An archetypal amalgam of motels across the world. There's another paranatural phenomena similar to a place of power, called a threshold. Thresholds are essentially regions in which the resonance frequencies of other dimensions align with Earth's own and create an overlapping bridge that connects each distinct reality to one another. Thresholds emerge spontaneously throughout the oldest house. Some last mere moments, while others are fixed and relatively stable. One such threshold is known as the clocks, a section of the oldest house recently sealed after it overflowed with spontaneously created wooden analog clocks. Thresholds exist beyond the confines of the FBC. An active and infamous one is located near Cauldron Lake in Bright Falls, Washington, and is central to the Alan Wake series storyline, but more on that later. As the Bureau continued to operate, Northmore distinguished himself not only as an authority-snatching, egotistical director, but also as the most powerful para-utilitarian known by the FBC to this point. He bound to himself the service weapon, the hotline, and the floppy disk, which he used to kinetically propel objects. As years passed, his strength buoyed but grew harder to control. Northmore worked ever closer with the board while distancing himself from his human colleagues. He continued to despise Theodore Ashe Jr. and thought Zachariah Trench, at this time a field agent turned assistant who deputized for the director, lacked ambition. Trench was weary of the board and trusted little in powers he could neither control nor comprehend. He was self-described as diligent, humble, and avoided unnecessary authority, the exact mirror to Broderick. In 1995, Ashe Jr. was replaced as head of research by Dr. Casper Darling, an eccentric yet deeply inspired mind. Trench and Darling worked closely over years and developed a bond that checked the director's obsession with power. Though the exact date has been redacted, towards the end of the 20th century, the FBC made their most important discovery since uncovering the oldest house. A stable threshold appeared near the maintenance sector that connected the Bureau to a strange land floating through the cosmos that held within a substance known as black rock. Black rock is a material found exclusively within this otherworldly threshold. It's a dark, extra-dimensional substance with inert and dense characteristics that block out most, if not all, resonance frequencies.
It keeps things stable, contained. Think of it as paranatural lead.
Since paranatural phenomena are tied directly to resonance, discovery of a substance that can negate dangerous frequencies was critical for the Bureau to control the paranatural. Extensive mines drilled for black rock, which formed shields, containers, the lining of safe rooms throughout the oldest house. Black rock also lined fire breaks, the bottomless chasms that separate regions of the oldest house, to prevent spread of paranatural substances should they break loose. If the service weapon is the FBC's sword, then black rock is most certainly its shield. At the turn of the millennium, two significant events, one within the Bureau and one in the greater world, dramatically catalyzed the narrative. Director Northmore, fixated for decades on accumulation of influence, on binding greater objects of power, on absorbing the alien majesty and truth of the board, grew beyond his own control. His paranatural abilities, specifically his body's capacity to generate heat, couldn't be focused or directed. He became a weapon that at a moment's notice could be turned on the FBC to disastrous effect. Trench confronted Broderick with an ultimatum: relinquish his position as director and voluntarily submit himself into containment, or be forced. Trench, with Darling's genius, created the Northmore Sarcophagus Container, or NSC, to not only confine the director, but also harness his paranatural energy as a generator to power the FBC. In this manner, Broderick could continue to serve the Bureau. Though he reluctantly agreed, an alteration in Northmore's paranatural abilities blinked the NSC out of reality. This dangerous setback nearly destroyed the Bureau, but Northmore was ultimately incapacitated and placed in the NSC-2 chamber. Precious few in the Bureau know what NSC stands for and whose power is imprisoned within. Northmore lies inside the sarcophagus and keeps the light on for the Bureau. The loss of Broderick, however, created a leadership crisis. As the first FBC director appointed by the board, and only person to hold the service weapon without dying, Northmore's vacancy generated profound questions. How should the FBC present a new directorial candidate? What type of person is the board looking for? Who is brazen or stupid enough to even try? As Darling puts it,
Come out of that Russian roulette a winner and you're it. Lose and you're, well, fucked.
Zachariah Trench, who'd recently lost his daughter to a paranatural illness and his wife in a subsequent divorce, had little to live for and drowned himself entirely in the FBC's mission. At a psychological low, he picked up the service weapon, perhaps expecting to die, but found himself ennobled by the board and declared the new Bureau director. Trench resolved to do for the Bureau what he couldn't do for his family: protect it, and he immediately enacted sweeping reform to bolster defense within the oldest house. Chief among these projects were creation of the Panopticon, a highly secure vault lined with black rock that stored altered items and objects of power, the fire breaks to limit potentially disastrous events from spilling across sectors, and the internal lockdown, which automatically seals fire breaks in critical moments, lifted only with the directorial override. All of this speaks to Trench's ingrained wariness of the paranatural and desire for control. He also feared another succession crisis following his own tenure, so established the Prime Candidate Program. This mission was responsible for identifying para-utilitarians and indoctrinating them in Bureau dogma to groom them as potential future directors. The second significant event transpired in the small town of Ordinary, Maine, with consequences that were anything but. Jesse Faden and her younger brother Dylan, as children, used to play in the town's rubbish dump. One day, the dump shifted and opened a deeper section, perhaps a threshold, where the siblings stumbled upon the slide projector, an immensely dangerous object of power, the activation of which catalyzed the Ordinary AWE. The slide projector acted as a gateway into other dimensions, depending on which slide was used, that the children had explored for fun. The ordinary AWE files gives Jesse's, Dylan's, and other children's descriptions of the worlds they visited. But the door opened both ways and allowed paranatural entities to invade our reality. In one slide, called The Hand by the Children, and later, Slidescape 36 by the Bureau, Jesse and Dylan felt a presence, a resonance-based being, an entity that communicated with them and filled them with awe. In Jesse's words, it was as though she had been born again or reawakened, and she named this entity Polaris. When the slide projector eventually burst open erratically, it led to the full-blown AWE, which allowed dark forces to enter, wiped out the town's adult population, and resisted all attempts the children tried to close it. Only with Polaris' assistance did the Faden siblings render the projector inert. The FBC immediately arrived on scene, gathered the slide projector and the town's children, but not before Jesse managed to burn all the slides, save Slidescape 36, and flee Bureau custody. Dylan wasn't so lucky. Though Trench and the Bureau weren't aware of Polaris' presence within Dylan, they nonetheless realized his potential as a para-utilitarian, brought him to the oldest house, and enrolled him in the Prime Candidate program as P6. This creepy semi-educational TV show, Threshold Kids, that plays on monitors throughout the Bureau, was developed to teach a young Dylan about the paranatural world. Casper Darling spent much time with Faden, who showed promise the likes of Northmore, but just as with the prior director, Dylan's power grew uncontrollable. An instance described in files and recordings where he accidentally but brutally killed an FBC agent sent the boy into isolation. Another incident, which resulted in the deaths of several more agents, cast him into solitary confinement within the Panopticon. Darling deemed Dylan a lost cause. Helen Marshall, the director of operations, thought him a dangerous liability and pushed for his permanent removal. It's while he was scared and hopelessly alone that Dylan cursed Polaris and his sister for abandoning him. This log highlights his interactions with the Resonance entity as it tries to contact him within the Panopticon at a later date. As Dylan suffered incarceration within the oldest house, Jesse struggled in the outside world. No parents, no brother, even the calming presence of Polaris grew rare. She kept one thing, however, the truth. Jesse knew the ordinary AWE was real, the Federal Bureau of Control was real, and that her experience opened untold possibilities. None believed her story, brushed it off as childhood trauma or a construct of her imagination. Faden drifted through life, but remained sensitive for possible leads on the FBC and the fate of her brother. Unknown to her, Jesse was under constant surveillance by the Bureau, who dubbed her P7, as she possessed as much, if not more, paranatural potential as Dylan. For the better part of 2 decades, Jesse was singularly focused on uncovering the Bureau. Meanwhile, Dylan might have been a dead end for Director Trench, but the FBC still had in its possession the slide projector from Ordinary, along with the unburned Slidescape 36. Darling celebrated the projector and established the Dimensional Research Department inside the research sector, dedicated to study of the Slidescape dimension. Expeditions journeyed into this dimension to gather data for new discoveries, but were surrounded by a ubiquitous resonance field, presumed to be the Polaris force, that had lethal effects on those exposed too long. Despite its inherent danger, Zachariah Trench insisted on joining the expeditions, and during one, he experienced a sound, like a needle, drilling in, cutting through the containment suit, reverberating in the base of my skull, my whole being. A resonance like Polaris, but different and from another origin. Though he felt the resonance effects, all medical and suit tests returned negative, and Trench's concerns were dismissed, which we see in this document.
Trench insists he heard something else. It made his ears bleed. Our equipment found no evidence of anything beyond the primary resonance. Trench's medical tests show nothing amiss.
The third Slidescape expedition uncovered something grand, what the FBC thought to be the source of the Polaris resonance. A living, intelligent paranatural entity, gray and in the form of a polyhedron. Darling named this entity Hedron, and due to its wide spectrum of unique resonance frequencies, determined it to be the greatest discovery in Bureau history. Darling's team immediately extracted Hedron from Slidescape 36 and brought it into dimensional research for further study. Darling and Trench collaborated on Hedron's protection. The director bound himself to two objects of power, the cigarette and the ashtray, using them to create the ashtray maze. This ever-shifting labyrinth was spatially impossible to traverse unless one was bound to the objects of power or had license from the director. Hedron and dimensional research were placed behind the maze not only to keep them secret, but also as a layer of protection for the Bureau should Hedron prove dangerous. It's difficult to determine the board's thoughts on Hedron and the Polaris resonance, but given that objects of power are linked to the board and Director Trench was ostensibly in their good faith, it'd be safe to assume they approved of research into Hedron's resonance. Perhaps they intended to learn ways to control or destroy it. As weeks turned to months, Darling and Trench both underwent strange alterations in behavior. Casper's fascination turned to obsession. He spent more time in Hedron's presence and exposed to its resonance. Darling was overcome by compulsions, hallucinations, and revelatory visions through which he believed Hedron not only communicated, but also protected. But from what? Trench's own mind was subtly manipulated by the other resonance frequency that bore into his skull during the Slidescape expedition. The director viewed Hedron as a threat to the Bureau, exemplified by Dr. Darling's apparent descent into madness. Madness and paranoia also afflicted Zachariah. He saw enemies in every shadow, believed Hedron to have corrupted his once close ally, and spread its insidious influence throughout the oldest house. In an uncanny moment of synchronicity, the two men arrived at the same conclusion. Something threatened the oldest house, the FBC, and all of humanity, and its attack was imminent. Darling believed Hedron attempted to alert him to the presence of another hostile resonance that would manifest against an unprotected Bureau.
We are about to be exposed to a different kind of resonance. Hostile, viral, invasive resonance.
Through his research, he created the HRAs, or Hedron Resonance Amplifiers, portable devices that amplified Hedron's signal and acted as a form of armor to shield wearers against this alternate resonance. Darling rushed to get as many HRAs built, but was opposed by the director. Trench thought the hostile frequency was already within the oldest house, in the form of Hedron, and saw the HRAs as the entity's attempt to infect more sections of the Bureau. Agents received conflicted orders. Head of Research demanded everyone don an HRA, while the director banned them outright. Some of this we see in documents where both sides fling incendiary remarks at one another. Conflict escalated when Trench took drastic measures to destroy Hedron and, in his mind, save the FBC. Unknown to all, Zachariah had kept a final, partially burned slide from the ordinary AWE. The resonance that had burrowed into his psyche within Slidescape 36 appeared to be the director's last resort, a force that could confront Hedron. Trench stole the slide projector from Dimensional Research, brought it to the Nostalgia Lab, fitted it with the burnt slide, and turned it on, opening the doorway to another dimension. What happened next was cataclysmic. The resonance entity that had afflicted Trench wasn't as powerful in Slidescape 36 as it was in this burned dimension, and it instantly revealed its nature. This entity, the Hiss, is a virulent, aggressive, and hostile force concerned only with spreading itself through realities and planes. The Hiss is a droning voice, a nagging whisper cloaked in deep crimson, a thought and compulsion that burrows into the minds of anyone exposed to its resonance. Jesse Faden describes it as this:
That babble's contagious. It burrows in like an infuriating melody that makes you hum it over and over.
It rips out their consciousness, locks away their mind, supplants their will, and shatters their bodies as it reconstitutes its victims. The slide projector acted as the origin point for the Hiss frequency and subsequent invasion of the FBC. Hundreds to thousands were instantly enthralled by the resonance, were transformed into Hiss, and used as broadcast points to proliferate the frequency. There are many stages and forms of Hiss affliction. Most unfortunate agents are locked within their own mind while their bodies are suspended in space. They drone lines referred to as the Hiss incantation. In the analysis of Hiss threat document, researchers describe the Hiss incantation as a recursive chant repeated by all Hiss entities. Its purpose and meaning remain unknown, but some speculate this might be how the Hiss frequency spreads and possesses other individuals. And the reiteration of particular words or phrases within the incantation suggests the message, an explanation of intent for the Hiss entity. Words such as want, you, through, and time appear often, which may hint at some message or meaning beneath the nonsense. Floating Hiss-possessed Bureau agents are non-hostile, but several Hiss entities are relied upon for combat roles. This includes rangers and agents who use conventional weapons as well as para-utilitarian entities that overwhelm with paranatural ability. Hiss beings are often grotesquely distorted, leading some to hypothesize that the resonance can integrate and reorganize matter on a molecular level. The resonance can also manifest physically in the form of red, geometric Hiss barriers or spherical Hiss clusters. The Hiss invasion brought immediate destruction. Besides the loss of life, the resonance infected control points throughout the oldest house, greatly destabilizing the Bureau. Fire breaks and lockdowns activated in response to its presence, which further fractured the house, isolating those who were guarded from corruption by Darling's HRAs, for it seemed Hedron's resonance counteracted that of the Hiss. Further chaos ensued when the Hiss demonstrated an ability to corrupt altered items and even objects of power, which set off dangerously violent paranatural events that exploded throughout the oldest house. The Hiss invasion might have destroyed much of the Bureau, but in the director's mind, it was the only way to mitigate Hedron's threat. Was this conclusion reached by Trench himself, or had the Hiss corrupted him beyond reason and implanted within his psyche this directive? It might appear that Trench had some remorse or realization for his actions. After releasing the Hiss, he sat alone in the director's office, with the service weapon to his head, perhaps contemplating and testing his continued worthiness as director. The board might have feared and despised the Hiss threat, and realized its chosen director was now beyond their control. Or Zachariah was driven to despair over the pain he caused the Bureau. Regardless, the acting director put the service weapon to his head and failed the test. His blood and brains splattered across the office. It's in this existential struggle for survival, the FBC's ruination at the hands of the Hiss and its attempts to contain the invasion, that Jesse Faden comes to its New York headquarters. A document tracking her location details how in the past few days she's been drawn to the oldest house. She had received a message from Polaris in the moments before the Hiss invasion. The resonance entity, either attuned to or able to foresee the future, guided Faden to the FBC, a place she had been trying to find her entire adult life. Though Jessie comes with questions on her brother Dylan and the truth of the universe, she quickly finds as she steps across the threshold that she'll be confronted with far more than answers. Immediately upon entering the FBC, Jessie senses something's not right. No security, no workers, no one can be found. A strange janitor named Ati provides no answers but ushers Jessie to her interview in the director's office. Here she finds Trench's dead body alongside the pistol, the director's service weapon. Urged by Polaris to grab it, Jessie is immediately transported to the astral plane, where she hears the communication of the board for the first time and must successfully complete their challenge. Doing so binds her to the object of power and elevates her to the position of FBC director. Now, at first, this would seem an unlikely outcome, but as mentioned, Jessie is just as, if not more capable than her brother Dylan, who was specifically groomed to be Trench's successor. She's a powerful para-utilitarian, further augmented by the Polaris frequency. After accepting her role in stride, Faden comes face to face with the Hiss. The resonance attempts to enter her mind and enthrall her to its will, but Polaris proves as effective as Hedron in shielding Jessie. Her guiding resonance dissipates the invading one. Though she is herself immune to the Hiss, Jessie must face the entities it sends against her to learn more of the oldest house's parlous state. Polaris is also invaluable in her ability to cleanse inanimate objects and altered items of Hiss infection. The Hiss has destabilized many control points throughout the oldest house, closing off large sections of the Bureau. After cleansing one such point in the executive sector, Jessie frees Emily Pope and a handful of agents shielded by HRAs. Pope, Director Darling's most promising understudy in research, tasks Jesse, now the acting director, with several missions critical to saving the Bureau. Faden hopes her cooperation will eventually reveal Dylan's location and status. The overarching mission is to put an end to the Hiss invasion, but several other matters must first be attended. Jesse needs to learn more about the Hiss from deceased Director Trench, must gather allies in the form of Communications Director Tomasi, Security Chief Salvador, and Operations Director Marshall, lift the fire breaks, search for more HRAs, and of course rescue her little brother. A nearly impossible list made more challenging by the Hiss corruption. Altered items run amok, the NSC reactor is unstable, thresholds resonate dangerously within sections of the oldest house. And though Polaris can cleanse infected objects, her powers are insufficient to cure Hiss-afflicted individuals. Jesse finds and binds the hotline object of power, giving her direct access to the board and astral plane. But the hotline also seems to impart visions, lingering memories of those who've recently passed. Trench's fractured messages are relayed through the hotline, urging Jesse to gather his management team in combating the Hiss. Unfortunately, Salvador and Tomasi have already been infected and must be killed. No one's seen or heard from Casper Darling since the Hiss invasion, and Helen Marshall is in the research sector, beyond the fire breaks. To continue, Jesse must use directorial override in the maintenance sector to lift lockdown. This region, guarded by Security Chief Erish, has been under heavy Hiss assault, which threatens to overload the NSC power plant and destroy the oldest house. Assisted by the enigmatic Ati, Jesse stabilizes the power plant, then performs the override, which opens up the sector elevator, and by extension, the Bureau's other critical regions. As Jesse explores the oldest house, she gains new powers by binding objects through the astral plane challenges. The board strengthens Faden because they are threatened by the Hiss. They feel its attempts to enter the astral plane, and if not fear, the board at least demonstrates urgency. If the Hiss were to enter the astral plane, there's no telling how disastrous the consequences could be. Even if the Hiss are limited to rampaging throughout the oldest house, they would still destroy a place of power the board has been interested in for untold years. Jesse joins forces with Helen Marshall in the research sector. She and her rangers were on their way to secure more HRAs. Faden clears a path through the Hiss to reach the labs. The HRA machine malfunctions, and its Blackrock prism shatters. To restore production, Jesse must make her way into the quarry threshold, where prisms are mined and processed. Again, the quarry is a stable threshold and source of vital black rock for the Bureau, but it isn't well understood, and it isn't without danger. Every team sent has a secondary objective of reporting back any contact with extra-dimensional entities. Though contact's never made, there are several reports of a supposed city in the distance, and some Blackrock transports even seem to be going that direction. Is this a real city, inhabited by other beings? Is it merely a grouping of Blackrock pillars that resembles a skyline? Or is it a mirage of the mind? This document reports that many workers stood transfixed, gazing at the city for minutes before coming to with no recollection. There's an additional region here, known as Quarry Site Beta, which is accessible solely through the jukebox object of power, that holds a mysterious pillar known as the Formation. The Formation exudes a bizarre field that acts like a sort of gravity well, attracting cross-dimensional travel to its location. This is why we see junk, items displaced in space and time, and even the first NSC appear at this site. Jesse recovers more Blackrock prism, which she returns to Marshall. But Faden isn't working from good faith. She wants answers on Dylan and knows Marshall has them. Head of Operations reveals Dylan's violent streak and his uncontrollable nature. He's been isolated within the containment sector's panopticon. Finally, after 17 years, Jesse is vindicated in her knowledge of the ordinary AWE, that it wasn't all in her head, and that her brother is still alive. As Marshall warns Jesse of her brother's danger, she questions her own nature. Is she, like Dylan, a monster that must be restrained? It's an internal conflict that continues to haunt Jesse throughout her time in the oldest house. While inside the panopticon, Jesse learns that another object of power, The Benikoff TV has been corrupted by the hiss and erupts with unstable energy. This continues to prove that the hiss is coordinated in its effort to attack the board and the astral plane through objects of power, and that it possesses higher intelligence than mere self-propagation.
What are you doing in there?
Oh, thank God! Look, someone has to watch this object at all times, or...
Another altered item with a strange story is held within the panopticon. The Arctic Queen refrigerator has been acting strangely and violently as of late. An outside force, though not hiss, influences it. The fridge is only placated through constant eye contact. If eyes are averted, it becomes unpredictably hostile. It kills the agent assigned to watch it and harms Jesse when she looks away. Interacting with the fridge transports Faden to the astral plane, but it's different. Dark, obscured in gray smoke without the presence of the Black Pyramid or the board. A terrifying paranatural entity confronts, attempts to communicate with, then ultimately attacks Jesse. This creature, known simply as Former, is suggested to have at one point been a member of the board itself before it was cast out. Whether Former's astral manifestation is the appearance of all board members, or if it took qualities from the children's drawings on the refrigerator, or even something else isn't certain. Neither is the entity's origin. At some point in the past, Former acted against the board's interests and was disgraced, exiled. It could be that this is Former's prison, or a hiding spot within the astral plane to avoid the board's rebuke. Or perhaps it's trying to sneak its influence back into the oldest house and the Bureau for vengeance on the board. This isn't the last time Jesse will confront Former. To Faden's dismay, the chamber housing Dylan lies shattered and blood-soaked. He slipped from her grasp again, but only so far as coming to the executive sector and turning himself in. The horrible truth? He's been affected by the hiss. Not completely enthralled like other FBC agents, but nonetheless corrupted by its influence. Dylan's character mirrors Zachariah Trench's in a few respects. Both were infected but not outright consumed by the resonance, which suggests that para-utilitarians worthy of directorship might possess some innate resistance to the entity. Like Trench, Dylan sees the hiss as an ally, not a threat.
I welcome the hiss. I let it in. To get rid of her, the hiss set me free. Polaris is using you. The Bureau is using you. You are a puppet.
This isn't the reunion Jesse expected, but she holds on to hope that the real Dylan is still somewhere within his mind, and vows to break him free from the hiss. Spurred by Dylan, Jesse finds the truth of the Prime Candidate program. The corridors and wings of containment reveal to her how closely the Bureau had been entangled with her own past. FBC agents have been observing her for years, listening to her conversations, and perhaps even planting their own as the psychiatrists that have been treating her trauma, to gaslight Jesse into believing the false narrative that the ordinary AWE never happened. Meanwhile, the Bureau has recreated the events of Ordinary and transported the entire Ordinary dump to study the slide projector. The object of power eludes her, but clues point to the dimensional research section. The only problem? It's sealed behind the dizzying ashtray maze. Worse still, the ashtray and cigarette objects needed to traverse it are beyond reach. And even more, the maze is broken, as per the janitor Ati. Jesse must reach Ati for a way through. But who, or what, is this strange Finnish man? Ati appeared in the oldest house shortly after its discovery by the FBC, and has always claimed to be its cleaning crew, though no record of his hire exists. His presence in restricted sectors and inaccessible regions has confounded the Bureau for decades, and he possesses strange, uncanny abilities. The Bureau determined him to be a paranatural entity of unknown origin or motive, but he's remained non-hostile, toiling away in his duties to clean the oldest house. When interacting with Jesse, Ati demonstrates telepathy and knowledge of the Polaris resonance. He responds to Faden's internal thoughts. He's also the only individual outside of Jesse immune to the hiss. Ati remains a mystery, but he's tied closely to the oldest house, its foundation, and perhaps even the board. Ati has disappeared, gone on what he calls a vacation, and ostensibly bypassing Bureau lockdown. But he guides Jesse via visions through the maintenance sector, the Black Rock Quarry, and a restricted zone that leads ultimately to a place within the threshold, simply dubbed Nowhere. The forest of columns, the eerie haze, the vast cavern of emptiness is reminiscent of the oldest house's foundation, which in fact it is. Suffice it to say, space and time are strange within control. Inside this section of the foundation, Jesse receives a gift from Ahti, his cassette player, an item capable of traversing the ashtray maze. After a mind-bending race through hiss-infested corridors, listening to a killer soundtrack, Jesse reaches dimensional research on the other side of the maze. Here, the Bureau launched its expeditions into Slidescape 36. This visual echo gives us a glimpse into that dimension, as well as the hand of pillars present within. Reddish sand from the projector expeditions lines the chamber floor. Jesse's mission is frustrated another time when she finds the slide projector's room empty. But she does uncover Hedron, which has remained in its chamber since the Hiss invasion began.
Hedron.
We built a
Was
container
that
for it.
you? Did he bring you here? Is that why you brought me here?
It appears to Faden that Polaris, the presence in her mind, has been projecting from Hedron. They are one and the same entity. At Polaris' insistence, Jesse opens the door to Hedron's chamber, but must remove a large HRA Darling had placed to protect it. As soon as the resonance field dissipates, Hedron is vulnerable to a Hiss attack, and dozens of entities swarm it. The Hiss realizes Hedron is a competing resonance, and coordinates efforts to destroy it. Jesse can't save Hedron from the damage. Its exterior cracks, and it falls to the ground. Polaris has left, gone silent. The Hiss has won, and Jesse's mind is vulnerable.
You are worn through time. The thunder song distorts you. Happiness comes. White pearls below.
This is a spectacular bit of drama on the developer's part, as the credits roll right after Faden begins reciting the Hiss incantation, making us believe this is how the game actually ends. Instead, we get a glimpse of the horror that plays out inside the minds of each FBC agent consumed by the Hiss. Imprisoned within their own consciousness, they're forced to live out an eternity of mundanity, tricked into thinking that this is the real world and that they had only been dreaming. Jesse, as an office intern, performs clerical duties ad infinitum. Mugs reappear to be cleaned, copies must constantly be made, letters sent. This could be her fate. Strangely, the janitor Ahti talks directly to the part of Jesse that is still her. He proves again his powerful paranatural abilities.
Are you sure you are not lost? Maybe you can find yourself in the director's office.
When Jesse enters the director's office, her mind pieces together fragments. She collects her conscious thoughts to wrestle lucidity from the Hiss. But time after time, the resonance proves too strong. The dream becomes a nightmare, with Jesse clones suspended in the air, droning the Hiss incantation. Jesse gains enough control to reach for the hotline and hears a message from Casper Darling. This suggests he has either recently died or else reached another dimension. In his office, within Jesse's own mindscape, a light switch manifests, which pulls her into the Ocean View Motel. Here, in the bedrock of her psyche, she finds herself united with the Polaris entity. Hedron isn't Polaris. It isn't the source of the resonance frequency, but rather a relay station, a catalyst that invigorated Polaris and made her stronger. In its final moments, Hedron catalyzes a change in Jesse that allows her to act as the local source of the Polaris resonance, in essence, allowing her to become a new Hedron. United once more with Polaris and freed from the Hiss, Jesse must turn off the slide projector. Dylan broke free from his chamber, took the projector to a bleed within the astral plane, and opened up Slidescape 36 for a direct Hiss attack on the board. The resonance appears strong enough to corrupt the board, or at least its transmissions from the Black Pyramid. In its desperation, the board demonstrates its potential, greatly increasing Jesse's combat ability. Faden also exhibits her newfound power as Jesse Polaris. Up to this point, she had only been able to cleanse inanimate objects of Hiss influence. But at the point of the Black Pyramid, she takes Dylan's head between her hands and banishes the viral resonance. Jesse thwarts the attack. She saves Dylan's body, if not his mind. She turns off the slide projector, which ends the active Hiss invasion. But Hiss entities remain inside the oldest house, and as long as they are present, the FBC is under firm lockdown. By this point, Jesse has grown into her role. She bravely assumes the responsibility of director of the Federal Bureau of Control. This life, this knowledge, this world is a strange one, but it's one Jesse has felt she belonged to since the ordinary event decades ago. This isn't the end of Jesse Faden's story, nor of her adventures within the oldest house. 2 DLC expansions were released to build upon the world of Control. The first, titled The Foundation, expands on the titular region of the oldest house, as well as the FBC's history in its discovery and analysis. Jesse receives a distressing hotline call from the board, claiming a situation has developed in the Foundation that threatens the oldest house. The site in the quarry threshold where Jesse met Ahti is also the door that leads to the heart of the Foundation. Etched on a pillar is a glyph of a tree with deep, branching roots. The tree imagery and its symbolism are entwined with the idea of the oldest house. The board refers to this door or the Foundation as a tree. It's been mentioned in recordings and documents that an ancient forest used to stand where modern New York now sprawls. And several researchers refer to the oldest house itself as a great tree whose branches are supported by the Foundation that reaches its roots deep into the nourishing ley lines around it. It's been roughly 70 years since the Bureau has ventured into the Foundation. Northmore, Ash Jr., and the FBC's initial research site after discovering the oldest house. Most of the current Bureau doesn't know it exists, but Helen Marshall seems to have taken keen interest in it and the Nail during the Hiss invasion. Her memories reach out from the other place to warn Jesse. She came to stop the Hiss from corrupting the Nail, and it's clear, since she's communicating through the hotline, that she died trying. As a tether between astral and physical plane, if the Nail were to be corrupted, untold devastation would ensue. What Jesse finds in the Foundation is shocking. The Nail has been severely damaged, which has distorted reality and altered dimensions. The astral plane is encroaching on the physical. Astral bleeds lead to gaping holes of white void in the cavern network, or floating bits of physical reality in the otherwise pristine astral plane. The Nail is an object not comprehended, and though it's connected to the oldest house via the Foundation, it's not a part of it. Think of the Nail as both an anchor and a doorway. It tethers our reality to the astral plane, while at the same time allowing the board to communicate and influence the physical dimension, just as the director traverses the astral. Some hypothesize that the astral plane is contained within the Nail, at least from our perspective. From the board's perspective, it could be that our reality is contained within. Regardless, its well-being is vital to the stability of both realms, which Jesse learns firsthand. She's tasked by the board with performing rituals at 4 sites throughout the Foundation that restore what they call keys or locks, and repair the Nail, thus stabilizing the astral collision and preventing destruction of the Bureau, or worse. The board grants an additional boon to Director Faden, but withholds another. Signs that they are subtly influencing events to their own benefit. The friction between the board and Jesse, who isn't simply an unthinking tool for them to use, grows when the paranatural entity Former reappears through images in Jesse's mind. First confronted as a hostile entity within the dark astral region tied to the fridge altered item, Former now presents itself as a non-hostile benefactor to the director's mission. There's enough lore and mystery surrounding Former to warrant its own video, but after Jesse cleanses the second key, it transports her, against the board's will, to the region where she can gain the withheld boon. This ability is vital for Director Faden to reach and cleanse the other 2 keys. After Former aligns itself with Jesse, the board grows suspicious of their influence over her. She uncovers, too, the Lesser Nail, located in Ash Jr.'s hidden lab alongside notes of the conversation the researcher had with F. Could be that this mini nail is Former's prison or place of exile, and that Jesse represents an opportunity for it to break free. After Jesse restores the nail in full, the astral bleeds stop, but terrible shudders rack the Foundation. The astral plane and the physical realm are vibrating at completely dissonant frequencies, which threatens to destroy both. The source of the anomaly is at the nail's base, and as Faden makes her way down, crystalline growth violently erupts in her path. It's as if the Foundation is trying to prevent her from restabilizing the nail. These growths have been present throughout the cave network, guiding along certain paths and blocking others in what appears to have been an attempt to keep the 4 keys locked. This document refers to the awareness and intent the Foundation's living caverns seemed to manifest. Interestingly, the board gives Jesse the power to destroy these crystals. It could be that the oldest house has been invaded by the nail, dominated by the board, and seeks to rid itself of both. Jesse also learns Marshall's fate. Director of Operations had always been suspicious of the board and thought they played a role in both Trench's death and the Hiss invasion. She tried to hit 2 birds with 1 stone by destroying the nail. First, to prevent the Hiss from taking control of it, and second, to weaken the board's grip on the Bureau. In retaliation, the board sent an astral spike, and in its attack, Marshall's HRA was damaged. At the nail's base, Jesse must confront the Hiss-corrupted Marshall and cleanse the area to prevent dimensional collapse. She's aided once again by Former, who sends in astral copies to help Jesse fight off waves of Hiss. In the aftermath, Jesse can barely make out the towering silhouette of Former amongst the Foundation's pillars before it disappears, hinting at the being's escape from its prison. The second DLC, titled AWE, connects Control to the greater Remedy Games universe by tying in aspects from the Alan Wake series. As this isn't a video focused on Alan Wake, I'll try to be brief. A threshold exists in Cauldron Lake, Bright Falls, Washington, that connects to a mysterious dimension known as the Dark Place. An extremely powerful paranatural entity, referred to as the Dark Presence or the Shadow, dwells within the Dark Place and extends its influence into surrounding Bright Falls. The Shadow isn't a resonance-based entity like the Hiss or Polaris, but among other abilities still demonstrates the power to enthrall individuals, turning them into maddened shades of their former selves. The threshold in Cauldron Lake exhibits strange behavior. Here, art begets the corporeal. Fiction becomes reality. A psychologist named Emil Hartman discovered the power of Cauldron Lake and grew obsessed with understanding it. He created a retreat lodge and psychological clinic near the lake to treat artists suffering from mental illness, but in reality, he used them for his own paranatural designs. In 2010, Alan Wake, a wildly successful and famous writer who suffers from mental blocks and hasn't written in over 2 years, is convinced by his wife Alice to travel to Bright Falls and talk with Dr. Hartman. Alan, like Jesse Faden, is a para-utilitarian, and shortly after coming near the Cauldron Lake threshold, realizes that his fiction is becoming reality. Through his writing, Alan can influence or alter real-world events, though it's made clear he doesn't have the power to create something from nothing, only guide what already exists. Alan's presence alerted the Shadow, which attempted to escape the threshold entirely and manifest in the physical world. The events of Alan Wake resulted in a strong altered world event. Alan wrote fiction into reality to save his wife Alice from the Dark Place, but was himself trapped within. The AWE alerted the Bureau, who sent a detachment to detain and question Dr. Hartman, while confiscating his life's work in understanding the Dark Place.
You will be detained until further notice, and all personal property will be confiscated, including the Cauldron Lake Lodge.
That's preposterous. You can't just seize my property. I'm a United...
With his world upended, Hartman decided to dive into the lake, where he was subsequently consumed by the Dark Presence and transformed into a shaded individual. Shaded Hartman was brought to the oldest house for containment and study. Nearly a decade after his disappearance, Jesse receives a hotline vision from Alan Wake. He's been furiously writing his fiction to alter real-world events. A distress signal, a plea that might help him escape from the Dark Place. Wake's message opens the investigation sector, an ominous and abandoned region of the oldest house. Jesse must discover the fate of the investigation sector and learn more of Alan Wake's situation, all while going through a region now consumed by sentient darkness, propagated by the Dark Presence. Just as in Alan Wake, darkness abhors the light, and Jesse can burn it with sufficient brightness. The puzzle begins to fit together. Dr. Emil Hartman had been contained in investigations for some time, but as this document reports, he broke free from confinement in 2017, enraged by the presence of Alice Wake inside the oldest house. Alice reached out to the FBC following several confrontations with an entity called Mr. Scratch that horrified and chased her throughout her home. When they brought her in for interview, the thing that had been Hartman went berserk, perhaps due to her connection to him and the Bright Falls AWA. Shaded Hartman rampaged through investigations, slaughtering dozens of Bureau agents and spreading Shadow's influence, which triggered fire breaks inside the oldest house and separated the small lobby of investigations, where survivors retreated, from the rest of the compromised sector. The loss of life hit William Kirkland, Director of Investigations, quite hard. Fallout within the Bureau was disastrous. Director Trench disapproved or ignored all requests for staffing and assistance within investigations. Trench blamed Kirkland for the incident and reminded him Hartman would have been more secure within the Panopticon. This led Kirkland to launch a flurry of investigations of misconduct into Director Trench, Casper Darling, and other high-ranking officials. As the month of the Hiss invasion approached, Kirkland grew increasingly convinced that Trench was afflicted by an outside presence, but no other sector cooperated with his inquiries to prove his point. Eventually, Kirkland reached a breaking point, resigned, and the severely understaffed investigations sector shortly dissolved while shadows continued to grow in the abandoned section. Hotline messages and a bizarre trip through the Ocean View Motel demonstrate the extent of Alan Wake's influence as he attempts to right his own freedom. Wake sets the stage for Hartman's gruesome transformation into the third thing.
The third thing. The sound made darker, the darkness made louder. Hartman was stretched like a worm through time. The third thing was a monster.
Not a man, not a shaded individual, but a creature of darkness corrupted by the hiss. The resonance and shadow strengthened one another, and while they twisted Hartman's form, he gained immense power. Alan's guidance of reality is also referenced in this document, which details an FBI agent by the name Alex Casey requesting the FBC to provide all information they have on Bright Falls. Not only was Alex a character in one of Wake's novels, but he appears in Alan Wake 2 as the FBI investigates a string of disappearances around Cauldron Lake. Even more profound is his influence on the course of Jesse's story throughout Control. Again, his paranatural abilities can alter reality or appear to predict the future, but they can't create something from nothing. Though he doesn't give rise to the hiss, Alan sets the stage for their invasion, as well as Jesse Faden's timely arrival. He needs her, a strong character, a powerful and curious individual who can piece together the mysteries that lead to his rescue. It's suggested too that Alan wrote the droning hiss incantation from within the dark place. He is not doing this for pleasure. Wake is a writer, and the fiction must be believable for it to take hold in reality. Stories need conflict. They rely on near insurmountable obstacles just as much as they do on dauntless heroes. To have as powerful a protagonist as Jesse, she needed to confront an equally dangerous threat. Faden's trip to the Ocean View Place of Power connects her briefly to the dark place in Alan Wake's current prison. The door is blazoned with a spiral, and this image appears in a painting within the dark place. The spiral symbolizes Wake's struggle. He's constantly writing and rewriting a way to escape the dark place. He's stuck in a loop of edits. But if it were an unending repetition, the image would be a circle. The spiral instead shows that Wake is making slow but deliberate progress with each attempt. After Jesse dispatches Hartman and clears investigations of the Shadow, the Bureau receives a transmission of another active AWE in Bright Falls. This sets up events for Alan Wake 2, which at the time of Control's AWE expansion hadn't yet been released. Jesse Faden's journey through investigations ties together both entries within the greater Remedy universe of the strange and unexplained. Jesse Faden herself, as acting director of the FBC, may soon be slated for another appearance as her, Dylan's, and Alan Wake's adventures continue. Thanks so much for watching and listening to this video on the complete story of Control. Let me know your thoughts on the board, the Remedy universe, and what you want to see in the next complete story explained video in the comments below. And if you're a fan of lore and storytelling, be sure to subscribe to the channel where content is uploaded frequently. I want to take a moment to thank my amazing patrons over on Patreon. Your support means the world to me and helps the channel continue to improve. If you'd like to become a lore luminary for access to me, a great community, written scripts, and early video drops, head over to patreon.com/thelorebrarians to learn more. Until next time, go forth and explore the lore.